Welcome back to the agenda. So with the expiry date of Zimbabwe permits fast approaching, the matter has been taken to court. Now, the Helen Suzman Foundation is challenging Home Affairs Minister Dr. Motsoaledi's decision to allow it to expire. The case will be virtual at 10 a.m. today. However, in studio, we're joined by SABC News reporter Canny Maphanga, who's been covering the story for us. Canny, good morning to you. Welcome to studio. It's good to see you in studio.
Good morning to you too, Naledi, and the viewers at home.
I think a good place to start is just to give some background, right? For those that really haven't been or really have been following the story but need a reminder of just how far this goes, because this conversation has been going on for a very long time with expiry dates that have continuously moved.
Well, initially we were having a conversation about illegal migration in the country. And then, of course, with the conference last year, the ANC came up with this policy framework which would tackle this issue. Of course, we saw a large emergence of those anti-migrant groups, several attacks, if I could phrase it that way, against migrants. And then, of course, when they went to that conference, they had to table some sort of a solution to deal with this issue. Of course, there are a number of things they're looking at, such as not being able to get citizenship through marriage. Those are some of the measures they're looking at to tighten immigration laws to deal with, I guess, our porous borders. But now when we get to the Zimbabwean exemption permits, I think it's important to understand that this was something that was introduced in 2009.
Yes.
And we're now in 2023. So some people that have been holders of that ZEP, which is, although it is a temporary document, it is a legal document. It may not be a mainstream visa, but it is a legal document. They've had that document since 2009. So you can imagine people have built a life here in South Africa.
By now.
Yes, by now, using that document. Of course, when that decision to terminate it, because it was a temporary document, it wasn't supposed to be here for a long time, of course that was met with a lot of criticism. And then of course you had the Helen Suzman Foundation, along with others, coming to challenge that decision. There was then one extension to accommodate some of those concerns. However, despite that extension, they're still continuing with the matter. And for the next 4 days, you'll see 3 main applicants. That's the Helen Suzman Foundation, the Zimbabwean Immigration Foundation, and Africa Amity, with 29 ZEP holders that will be challenging that decision.
Yeah, we essentially saw, though, and I want to talk about where we are for those ZEP holders that are watching right now and are thinking, okay, what is my expiry date? Because they need to plan their lives around this. Last year, we were telling them that the expiry date would be the 31st of December, and that by January this year, they'd have to be out of the country, essentially, or be here illegally. What's the latest with that?
Well, Home Affairs, as you might know, have been dealing with a backlog when it comes to some of these mainstream visas, waiver applications. At this stage, we don't know when they announced the ZEP and they gave the option of applying for waivers or mainstream visas, how many of those were approved, how many of those were denied. We also know that some ZEP holders chose to wait out for this case to take place before they make any movements on this issue. So, of course, this latest extension, the one that goes towards the end of this year, is to deal with the backlog. But technically, the expiry date is the 30th of June, 2023. So pending this application, if the Helen Suzman Foundation and the other applicants are successful, then of course that date is null and void. But it's important to understand that the Helen Suzman Foundation is not asking for the court to change the minister's decision. Rather, they're asking the court to declare that initial decision to terminate to be unlawful and unconstitutional. Because
so the entire expiry process to be unlawful. That's what the Helen Suzman Foundation wants.
The initial one kicked off by the minister due to the fact that they believe there was no consultation and a proper fair process was not followed in reaching that decision. So it's not to reverse the minister's decision, but to remit it back to him and say, let's follow this process accordingly.
But what's the argument that some of these applicants really are making as to why this expiry or the removal of the ZEP permit essentially is stopped, right? What is the argument that the Helen Suzman Fund? I know that is it a human rights issue for them in their view?
Of course, it's a human rights issue, but also remember with the expiry of the ZEP holders are not people that hold critical skills. These are people that are coming for your basic employment, it's temporary residency, issues such as that. So the Helen Suzman Foundation is saying that there's barriers to getting that mainstream visa that are available to the ZEP holders should they want to stay. Of course, it's quite difficult to get that critical skills visa. On top of that, they're arguing that a lot of these holders have been here for at least over a decade, so you've built a considerable life here. What do you return to when you go back to Zimbabwe? So those are some of the logistics they're looking at. It's the constitutionality of, springing up this decision over a decade after this permit was introduced in 2009, and saying that, you have to pack your bags your whole life that you've lived here and return to Zimbabwe. Of course, we've seen the Zim Embassy has said that they're going to support and facilitate some of the returns back home. But the question is, when you go back to Zimbabwe, what is there for you to continue your life with when you've been in South Africa for at least over a decade? So I think that's at the heart of the issue. It's not necessarily what the ZEP means, but rather the implications of what it will be should it not be in place following
for the
this.
holders. Just quickly, what we're hearing, what's the latest we're hearing from the Department of Home Affairs and Minister Motsoaledi? They're holding their ground.
They're holding their ground regarding this ZEP issue. We'll be able to hear some of those arguments in court. We know that there is that extension up until the end of the year, but that is to accommodate the issue of the backlog within the department, not necessarily to keep that permit in place. But we'll be giving you those updates as that court case begins. It's a virtual hearing, which will begin at 10 a.m. this morning. Over the next 4 days, up until Friday, we'll hear all those arguments, and we'll be able to update you accordingly.
Well, we'll bring you all of those proceedings, and what we don't bring you, Canny will certainly keep you updated on it as well. Canny Maphanga, our reporter there, thank you so much for coming in.